You think you know Roman emperors? Think again. Forget Caesar. Forget Nero. Today, we're unearthing a forgotten monster whose cruelty plunged Rome into a nightmare. This isn't the sanitized history they teach you. This is the truth about a man so utterly depraved, so consumed by sadism, that even his own slaves rose up against him in a bloody, desperate rebellion. And the way he died, it was a poetic, horrifying end to a reign built on terror. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about the power of Rome, because we're about to explore the darkest corners of an empire where humanity was utterly lost. If you're prepared to face the real forgotten horrors of history, hit subscribe, because you haven't heard anything yet. Our monster's name was Maximinus Thrax. He wasn't born into luxury. He was a barbarian, a peasant from Thrace, towering over 6 feet tall in an era when men barely reached 5.5. This was a man of immense strength, rumored to crack stone with his bare hands and eat 40 pounds of meat a day. He clawed his way to power through sheer brutality, seizing the throne by force in 235 AD. But here's the truth. Maximinus brought that same savage ferocity to his rule. He despised the Senate, saw the elite as weak, and ruled with the iron fist of a warlord, not an emperor. His reign began not with celebration, but with a purge. Dozens of advisors and rivals were executed without trial. We're talking about a man who didn't just order deaths, he savored them. Imagine this. Senators dragged naked through the streets, publicly beaten, then fed to wild beasts in the arena, not a spectacle for crowd, but for the emperor's amusement. You won't learn that in history books. Maximinus didn't just rule Rome, he terrorized it, and this was just the beginning. Maximinus's cruelty wasn't limited to executions. He perfected psychological torture and bizarre games. He was so paranoid he saw enemies everywhere, and his methods of extracting confessions were barbaric. One favorite tactic was tying conspirators inside freshly flayed animal hides, then throwing them to dogs. As the hides dried, they slowly crushed the victims inside, mimicking being eaten alive. Think about that. He invented torture to simulate a slow, agonizing death. But here's where it gets truly sick. He forced the families of condemned to watch, wives and children helpless, their pleas ignored, as loved ones were suffocated and devoured. This wasn't justice. It was a theatrical display of power designed to crush dissent. His guard, made up of Thracian warriors, were not just soldiers. They were his instrument of terror, loyal only to him. They raided noble households, seized property, arrested anyone suspected of disloyalty, and vanished them into dungeons, never to be seen again. The empire lived in fear. This level of cruelty turned Rome into a nightmare. Even his household, his slaves, endured the most intimate horrors. You'd think the Senate or the legions would rise against such a tyrant, but you'd be wrong. Maximinus's terror was so crushing that it was the unseen population, the most vulnerable, who reached their breaking point first, his slaves. They witnessed his brutalities up close. They cleaned blood from his floors, prepared his meals, heard screams from torture chambers. They endured his rages, his beatings, and the constant threat of death. For them, death might have been release. The spark of rebellion, when it came, was shockingly simple, yet desperate. In 238 AD, a group of his slaves, pushed beyond endurance, made a pact. They would rather die fighting than live under his monstrous rule. The plan was audacious, suicidal, born of desperation. They had no armies, no senators. They had only rage and the knowledge that every day under Maximinus was terror. And they gambled everything on one act of defiance. This is the raw courage history usually buries. The revolt erupted not in some distant province, but within his own household. Men and women who had endured years of abuse suddenly turned on their master. It was violent, bloody, a desperate lashing out. They attacked the guards, not with precision, but with the ferocity of cornered animals. While swiftly crushed, its impact was seismic. It sent shockwaves through the empire. The idea that an emperor's slaves would dare rise up was unprecedented. It showed just how Maximinus had broken the contract. This small rebellion by Rome's lowest class was the first crack in his grip. It emboldened others. Soon after, landowners in Africa, disgusted by his taxes and cruel reign, rebelled and proclaimed a new emperor. Then the Senate, seeing his weakness exposed, finally acted, declaring him a public enemy. The man who ruled through fear was now hunted by an empire he had terrorized. Maximinus Thrax, the barbarian emperor, found himself besieged in Aquileia. He was trapped, surrounded by his disgruntled legions and a populace that despised him. Inside the walls, conditions were dire. His soldiers, tired, starving, and terrified, began to question their loyalty to a man who had brought nothing but misery and war. But here's the satisfying part. Maximinus, who had ordered countless brutal deaths, was betrayed and murdered by his own troops. His Praetorian Guard, once his loyal instruments of terror, finally turned. They crept into his tent, not in a grand battle, but in a chilling mutiny. They sliced off his head. Then, to make sure his reign was over, they cut off the head of his son too. The heads were placed on poles and carried back to Rome, a grisly trophy signaling the end. This wasn't just regicide. It was a desperate act of catharsis for an empire suffocated by tyranny. The man who reveled in humiliation and gruesome spectacles met his end in a violent, undignified way, a victim of the brutality he inflicted. Maximinus Thrax, forgotten emperor, is a chilling reminder of how absolute power corrupts, turning a man into a monster. His story proves that even the oppressed can break free, and that sometimes the most horrific end is exactly what a tyrant deserves. His legacy isn't of glory, but a masterclass in how sadism can unravel an empire. If this descent into forgotten depravity made your jaw drop, hit like, subscribe for more shocking secrets, and tell me in the comments, what other forgotten tyrants should we unearth next?